back to another episode of A Rugby with Pads. Today we've got an episode which we did last year, and we're going to try and refresh it a little bit. So last year, my second ever episode was the Fantasy 101, what you need to know to play fantasy football effectively. Effectively? Is that the right way to describe it? Well, we're going to describe it that way anyway. This year, we've all leveled up. You've listened to me for however long. Some of you are intermediate, some of you are experts now, some of you have beaten me in other leagues as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a bit more of an advanced topic discussion. We're going to do a Fantasy 102, but we know we've got a lot of new members to the Rugby with Pads community, so we're not going to miss out we're not going to miss out if you're a beginner. We are going to do a bit of a 101 recap and split this episode into two. So we'll do a 101 and then a bit of a deeper dive into 102. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm actually going to be recording this a bit early. I'm a bit ahead of my off-season schedule, so I can have some time with family over summer. So if you're watching on YouTube, it might be a bit jarring because it might be a couple of costume changes. But obviously, as always, you remember you can go and get your Rugby with Pads merch. That was a weird hand gesture I was trying to mimic here, but you can get your Rugby with Pads merch at rugbywithpads.com. How many times can I say Rugby with Pads in a sentence? That many, apparently. Right, let's jump into the action. We're going to start with a recap of 101 and try and do it as quickly as possible. So we'll start out with a bit of glossary of terms. And something that you'll probably hearing a lot at the moment when this comes out is drafting. Well, I'm actually, funnily enough, in the middle of my rookie draft. It's a bit of an intense time over there, but it's going really well. And drafting is really key to everything that we do in fantasy football. Effectively, drafting is where you get your players. If you play in a redraft league, every year you draft players according to what you need for your team, what you want. You have to fill out your roster. We'll get to that in a second. And if you're in a dynasty league, just like this, we have to draft rookies only. So I'm adding to my team by adding rookies to my roster, and I managed to get Jameer Gibbs in the first round. I'm really happy with that. So drafting is really important because it starts off your team in exactly the way you need it to. It gives you your first roster, and there are loads of different ways to draft as well. In redraft, it generally goes based on how well you did last year in a reverse order. You can have random drafts, seeded drafts, snake, where if you have the first pick, you have to wait all the way around to the next the last pick of the second round, and then you get a turn. There's loads of different ways to play. In most rookie drafts, we play linear, and there's even the concept of a third round reversal to make it a bit fairer. Now, all of these have a level of luck involved, and you can judge the luck a little bit by where you get drafted. Obviously, the person with the first draft pick is going to get the best player, we would think, but they're going to have to wait a lot for their second player. You can level the scores a little bit by going for an auction draft. We're going to do a full episode on auction drafts later on in the off season, so watch this space. But that's effectively you get given a budget and you blind bid on players until you fill up your roster. Now, your roster is really important. Your standard roster is filled with all the positions that you're going to need to play: your quarterbacks, your wide receivers, your running backs, and your tight ends. That is the team you're going to play. Each week, your roster has a main roster, your starting roster, and you have your bench, obviously, as well. And there's loads of different positions to play. And we're going to jump into those really quickly and how they work in fantasy, because it's not quite like real American football. Now, hopefully you're coming into this with a basic understanding of American football. I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to teach what a touchdown is. So go and look at any the BBC NFL, or what used to be the BBC NFL YouTube, was really good. I think it's all over on ITV now, but they do a really good kind of beginner's guide to American football. So go and have a look at that there. But we start off with the most important position in all of the sport, the quarterback. Now, the quarterback is probably less important these days in terms of fantasy, but it's very important in terms of real football and is the linchpin of your team. They score points by throwing the ball and having people catch the ball. Typically, they'll score a quarter of a point. Is it quarter of a point? Quarter of a point per 10 yards. So I think it's 1 point for 25 yards. I think it works out to be, or something like that. But effectively, they're going to throw a lot, so their scoring is reduced accordingly. They score points for scoring touchdowns as well, whether that's throwing them or being on the floor. Obviously, if they catch it, like in the Philly special, they get points for that as well. Um, and yeah, it's a position you have to have, just like you have to have in football. Um, their value these days is a little bit underrated. Maybe I don't know which way it goes really, but the common logic for the last few years has been because there's so many of them. There are 32 teams. There's 32 scoring quarterbacks. The difference between number one and number 32 isn't as great in other positions as it is in. Sorry, it isn't as great in QB as it is in other positions. So the availability is pretty high. So the common logic in previous years is to wait or pick someone up later because you're probably playing a 12-team league. Even if everyone picks up two, that's 24. There's still 8 left that you can pick up. So that maybe it's better to prioritize other positions. But that's where the advent of superflex leagues or 2 QB leagues, where, funnily enough, you play 2 QBs, where in a normal roster you would normally play one. Now, wide receivers are the guys that are catching the ball from the quarterback. They score points in the kind of reciprocal fashion of the QBs. So they score points by getting touchdowns and getting yards as well. There are also scoring types such as PPR, which is points per reception, and there's single point, double point, half point, where if they receive the ball, they also get extra points. So on top of their yards and touchdowns, for receiving, they get an extra point. And that's becoming more and more popular these days. I think the majority of leagues are PPR or half PPR. There's also a couple of ways of scoring as well. There's points per first down, which, funnily enough, if you get a first down and you make a relevant play to in real football, and this is where the deviation between real football and fantasy football kind of comes together a little bit, and I quite like that style. You start getting it mirror live a bit more, and you get more points in that way as well. So it's just different ways of scoring. And what I would say at this point is when you're talking about PPR, just check your rules to see how it goes, because it depends on your rules, depending on who's more valuable. Now, in a standard league where you're not scoring points per reception, the person scoring the most touchdowns and the most yards is the most important. But in a PPR, someone can be more relevant. I think I like the format because it makes it more relevant for more players. A player like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is not a big long touchdown guy. He is a short catch, lots of catches. Previous years, Cooper Kupp has held that mantle as well. Is way more valuable than, let's say, I can't think of an example here, but an old school Deshaun Watson type who would score lots of touchdowns, but maybe 1 or 2 plays in that game, but he would be the clutch guy. And it just, it's worthwhile weighing up where you're drafting wide receivers based on volume versus high yardage. We will do a draft 101 or draft 102 as well, like a level up as well. So don't worry too much about the draft side of things. We're going to be talking about topics, but not necessarily about what you should be doing and strategy yet. So just getting used to the basic types of nomenclature we're going to use. This is all designed to just help you enjoy and understand what we're trying to do here at Rugby with Pads Industries. Maybe we'll call ourselves that moving forward. Now, running back, RB. In my opinion, possibly the most important position in fantasy football, or was anyway, for many years. And because of that, you saw a lot of really high draft capital around running backs. They're scarce, but they're not. They're scarce and replaceable. The top 5 guys are going to be way above the next 10 guys, and that has been the same for the last probably 10 years. But what happens is those top guys can be replaced really easily. It only takes an injury, and they're probably the most injury prone guys. So it's boom or bust on some of these picks, which is why you hear a lot of players going against the grain and not drafting running backs early. And we'll talk about that in the 102 segment as well. Obviously, they've got the same scoring types as wide receivers, but they score more by running it as well. These guys are less likely to catch the balls, but it's really important if you can get a pass catching running back. Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler, those guys are going to be really, really good this year, because not only do they get points for running the ball, they get points for catching the ball as well, and they're more likely to be involved in touchdowns in loads of different ways. So the value adjustment is in accordance with how they play, and worthwhile paying attention to real life in those situations. Now, tight ends are a bit of a hybrid role. That they are technically scored in exactly the same way as wide receivers, PPR, if whatever you want. But they have a much harder job, in my opinion. Typically, the top guys in the tight end range are the guys who don't get blocking assignments. So a tight end sits on the edge of the line effectively, and sometimes will be involved in blocking in running plays, sometimes in blocking in passing plays as well. But sometimes they'll be allowed to move out and they are actually eligible to catch the ball. Thus, they're a bit similar to receivers in the way they're scored. But their blocking responsibilities mean there's less chance they're going to be involved. Now, these guys are probably bigger. A lot of them are ex-basketball players or have that kind of physique. So they're bigger and taller. Yeah, they're chunky dudes, a lot of them, which means they're involved in touchdowns on a more frequent basis. Well, maybe not on a more frequent basis, but more a percentage basis of their play. They're involved in those kind of contested catch scenarios, which means that the guys who are really good, the Travis Kelce's, the George Kittles, the Darren Wallers, are really, really, really good. Mark Andrews as well. But everyone else maybe gets dropped down a little bit because they're doing so many duties that a lot of them are replaceable down after down and they don't play every down. So it's worthwhile, in my opinion, these days, getting a good one early if you can. Now, last year you would have, I would have shot myself for for talking about that, but tight ends have become more of a premium position this year, and I really do think it's going to be interesting to see how people get drafted when we get into draft season. Now, the flex, you'll hear this term a lot. The flex is just someone else. There's lots of different types of flex. You can get a flex position which you can play either a wide receiver or a tight end, either a wide receiver or a running back, a wide receiver or a tight end and running back, or a super flex, as we mentioned before, where you can play any player in an offensive position. So that's including quarterback as well. It's just another position on your roster, and a lot of leagues have them to allow you a bit of flexibility in building your lineups week by week and seeing if you've got a good roster, you can really flex it in this situation. In most leagues, you typically have a defense as well, otherwise known as DST, defense and special teams. They score in the opposite way of all the offensive players we've spoken about. They score high if they don't concede touchdowns. So they'll typically start with 10 points potentially and then lose points for how many touchdowns they concede, how many yards they concede, all of these kind of things. But they will score points for forcing fumbles, recovering fumbles, defensive interceptions, and obviously pick sixes or fumble return sixes as well. So they can score touchdowns, and a good defense can sometimes be the difference between winning or losing a game. But they are way more unpredictable because you've got to predict what 11 guys are going to do, not just the one guy that you know has one specific responsibility. There are some leagues which do individual defensive players. Well, I am not involved in that. That is probably a step beyond me, and maybe it's complication for complication's sake. But that's not the last position. Obviously, we have our final position, which is the kicker. You'll hear me say it a lot, but kickers aren't important in fantasy football. A good one is, but you just want one who's going to be there and be able to get it through the uprights. Most of them will be 95% accurate. They'll score 3 points for getting a field goal. If it's a really long field goal, they'll score 5 points potentially. Some leagues have points per yard or something. It's silly, but I don't put a lot of stock in kickers because just like quarterbacks, there's 32 of them. You only start one. They're replaceable. Don't draft them early. They're not hugely important, but having one that's going to play is important, and you'll see that when we go into our draft strategy later on in the coming months. I think this is going to come out in late June, probably. So you'll see it probably in July and August when we get into draft season, how we deal with kickers, especially when there's a lot of draft capital elsewhere. Now, there's a couple of other ways to build your roster as well, and one of them is with the stack. Now, this is maybe a 101 and a half topic, but a stack is picking two players of the same team who are likely to interact with each other. Now, a good stack is an example is Patrick Mahomes and Kelsey. If you can get those two, one's going to throw to the other. You're going to score. For every touchdown they score, you're scoring 2. So you're getting more of that positional value on both sides there. You can also get stacks with quarterbacks and wide receivers. um, running backs and quarterbacks. Typically, it's someone you're going to throw to, but there are kind of minor stacks as well. Depending if you buy into game plan, sometimes a team who runs the ball a lot and stifles someone on defense is a really good stack. So running back and defense is really interesting. But stacks are where, especially in types of games like best ball, which will go into the 102, are really important to help you score really highly and punish your opponent. Now, there are ways to move around your roster a lot as well. So, on top of that, you have bench players who are your substitutes who each week you'll bring in, depending on who can play, who's got the best matchups, who's most likely to score the most points for you, and who's most likely to help you win your matchup. But you can change throughout the season. Drafting is not where it ends. You've got the waiver wire, which is where you bid on players based on your priority. A couple of different ways of doing this, but if you've got the worst record, you typically have the best chance of getting the guy you want. If you've got the best record, at least it's just like it is in real football. There's free agency, which is a free for all, first come first served, and of course you've got trades. And trades are really interesting because they, for me, are what keeps me really interested in fantasy football. And when you are dealing in other formats such as Dynasty, for example, Dynasty, where you don't redraft a different team each year you keep the same team and you have to be a GM, effectively a general manager, just like in real football, and change your team up accordingly. The waiver wire is really important. Waiver wire is really important. Yes, free agency is really important, but trades with your fellow competitors, where you're deciding, all right, well, this year isn't the year for me. I'm going to reload, trade away my assets, and go after it next year. It's really important, and we're going to do a whole trade episode for the off season as well, and maybe look out for some of the Dynasty digests and Dynasty Road to Redemption podcast as well, because we'll do a little bit in that. Now, you can't trade all the time. Most of the time you can trade in season, because it's a bit unfair if you're going to lose and then you trade away your best player to a guy that you want to win. So there are trade windows as well, which typically open on the second or third week of the season and close on the 12th week of the season. Obviously, you've got a load of players. What do you do with them? You've got to set your lineup. Setting your lineup is something that we talk about a lot. We'll talk about it every week on the Thursday pod in the main season, and we'll also probably talk about it in the waiver wire comment on Mondays as well. But setting your lineup is really important because that lets everyone know who you're going to play and how you're going to score those points. You need to set your lineup before the week starts to make sure that you've got eligible players and you can play this week. Now, if you can't play certain players because they're injured, suspended, or otherwise, there are ways to still keep them. You don't have to drop them and put them on the waiver wire straight away. Instead, you can go and put them on what's called an IR spot. IR spot, just like real life, they don't count towards your roster size and your overall lineup, but you can still keep them stashed away for when they get better. That's really important as well. Matchups in fantasy football are your head-to-heads, basically. So rather than just being whoever scores the most points that week gets the most points, and you stack up the points, typically you'll go head-to-head with someone. And just like in real football, you'll have a round robin tournament across your whole league, and you'll be competing with each other each week, probably for 14 to 15 weeks of the regular season, depending on how big your league is. And then during the playoffs, which is, whereas before it was a round robin tournament, the playoffs is a knockout tournament to get you to the Super Bowl, where you can win your championships. But each week is 1v1. It only matters who you're playing. If you score more than them, you go through in the playoffs. If you score more than them in the regular season, you get the win. There is no second place there's a second place. It's just the first loser in fantasy football, compared to fantasy Premier League, where obviously you just stack your points and you see who comes out the top at the end of the season. Right, that is a really whistle-stop tour through the 101. I'd recommend, if you want a bit more of a deep dive, go back and I'll put somewhere here. Oh no, I haven't actually got it on YouTube. You know what? I'm going to upload it as a private video and I'll put it somewhere up here for you guys to take a look at the Fantasy 101 upload from last year. It'll be audio only because we didn't get it to video, but take a look if you want a refresh in a bit more detail. But hopefully this gives you enough ammo to go forward. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to have a look at the 102 topics. Now, these are a bit more advanced topics, and maybe whereas before I held back a bit last year, This year, I want to talk about some things that are really interesting me, some topics that I think are a bit more advanced, but hopefully, you'll catch the bug and you'll get interested in what I'm interested in terms of fantasy football. So we'll do another glossary style run through these things, but we'll do maybe a deep dive on a bit more of these topics because they're a bit more advanced and they're a bit more interesting to me. How many times can I say advanced and interesting? I don't know, but we'll be back on the other side. So watch this space. I'll see you there. Right, competition time, guys. Rules are on the screen as you see them now, but part one is we're trying to drive subscriptions to rugbywithpads.com. You can find all the information here, but for every single subscription you make from £1 a month, you can get all the benefits like you would do on a normal Patreon. But as you go up, you can also get merch with it as well. And this is how we're selling our merch that you've seen me wearing during some of these YouTube videos as well. If you enter for as little as £1, you'll be entered into the competition. There's bonus entries for higher tiers as well. Now, we'll announce the winner of that on the pod once we've got a minimum of 10 subscribers, and then part two comes in. So get ready already. Go to youtube.com/rugbywithpads, click subscribe and comment on any of the videos. And there's a fair few. We bring out the videos at the same time as we do on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And you'll be entered into a competition to win either a t-shirt or a pop socket. It's free, but we must make sure that part one is won first. Let's drive that traffic over to rugbywithpads.com and the draw announcements will be on the pod. I'll keep you updated with what we're doing and put some stuff on socials. Right, back to the pod. Right, and welcome back. For those of you watching on YouTube, this will look a bit strange because we're in a completely different outfit. Not that makes much of a difference. It's been a couple of weeks since I recorded the first part of this episode. Want to just take a little break and come back to it a bit renewed. So this is after a shave, a change, and ultimately just a bit of a rest from it all. So we did a big chunk of recording a couple of weeks ago, and this is a part of that block as well that we want to get ahead of time so we can start our beginner's schedule, of which this is part of it. So last part you heard the 101, and what we want to get onto now is the core of it. We want to get into the 102 of fantasy football. Effectively, it's what's missing. What I wanted to do was let's look at all the topics that we haven't discussed before, but I think or we've alluded to before. But what we want to do is, can you keep up with this show? I guess is one of the main things, and ultimately, you don't need to keep up with the show. We talk about some complex things, we talk about some intermediate things, we talk about some beginner things, but these are topics that we cover quite a lot during the pod. And you know what, I for my work, I frequently write glossaries for people to understand what we're actually talking about. This is exactly what we're looking to do here. This is the kind of intermediate glossary to the 101's beginner glossary. Funnily enough, we are actually going to do next week a fancy A to Z. Not A to Z because we're not American, but we'll do a fancy A to Z, which will be your full glossary of everything, but just as a bit of fun more than anything, and to cover more topics as well. But we'll go into each of these in a bit more detail of why they're relevant. So this will be probably the main proportion of this episode. So hopefully you stayed on and and the 101 didn't bore you to tears if it's too simple for you. Anyway, let's carry on. Let's start off with what a commissioner is. And what I wanted to cover was not necessarily what a commissioner is, but what a commissioner should be. Now, if you want, there is a great episode from last year, and I'll probably pin it in the comments somewhere, that there was an episode last year where I talked about what makes a good commissioner, because I've had some really terrible experiences with bad commissioners. No one listening here, hopefully, but I had one last year where the commissioner just went AWOL and let the league renew and just happen. They put the draft at a time where no one could make it, only two people including him could make it, and it just turned into a bad league. Ultimately I actually won that league, but I didn't really count it. I haven't really talked about it outside of having the bad experience, because a commissioner can make or break a league, and we've talked previously about what makes a bad commissioner, but we can also talk about what makes a good commissioner. Now, a commissioner, how many times can you say it in a sentence, is the person who runs the league for you. He is the league manager. He or she is in charge of making sure everyone is paying their dues. If you have a due-based league, that's fees for anyone who doesn't know. Who is responsible for making sure alerts and communication is there. And ultimately, I think being a good commissioner breaks down to one thing. Well, two things. Listening and communicating. So, the age-old adage of you've got two ears, and one mouth, so you should listen twice as much. I'm a big proponent of that. I send out lots of polls in my league to make sure people are engaged. I make sure people are active. And we have had a turnaround in a couple of my leagues where we've had to remove some people and bring them on. But it's been a sensible conversation. And as long as we communicate that and you communicate with your commissioner, that's what you really wanted to aim at. And that leads to a great relationship. Commissioners set rule sets. They decide whether something is fair. They are the ultimate decision maker, and they decide things like whether trades are fair. And that gets into our next topic, which is vetoes. Now, vetoes is something that if you're on fancy Twitter now, not that many of you will be. I am always on fancy Twitter. You can follow me at Rugby with Pads on there. There's a lot of talk about trading at the moment. Now, trading is rather prevalent in Dynasty, and we'll get onto the concept of Dynasty in a minute. But trades can be fair and unfair. But I think that a veto, and just in like the real world, a veto is a commandment to stop something from happening effectively. Vetoes should not be used in fantasy football unless there is maybe two reasons why. I think if someone is under duress and being tricked into something, there's maybe two sides of that. You should be tricked into it. You should do your research. You're playing a game with stats that are involved, so you should be up and it should be part of the game. But when there is collusion involved, and collusion being two or more players deciding to collude against another set of players to alter the dynamics of the league, that's the only time it should be vetoed. Now, a lot of trades by standard go to the commissioner to be approved. Anyone who plays in my leagues will know that as soon as I see that trade, I will approve it. I will take one glance at it, approve it, and then I will look at it later if it needs to be reversed. I've never reversed a trade, and it shouldn't be the case. Again, going back to the concept of good commissioner, bad commissioner, I was in a league where the commissioner didn't accept all the trades to start with, and you can auto accept it. I just have that not auto accept just to kind of bridge a little bit of gap and make sure there is a little bit of control and it's not too crazy. That doesn't stop trading in our league though. In fact, during our rookie draft, which has just finished last week, we had 11 trades in draft. Crazy. I think I did a poll and the average was about 5 that the people have in their draft. In a 40 to 48 pick draft, they have 5. In a 40 pick draft, we had 11. It's absolutely insane. So we were actually really proud of that. Having so many there, but go beside it. Vetoes are something that should be used sparingly by commissioners. A bad commissioner will use them wrong. Now, your commissioner, or if you are a commissioner, or what have you, will probably be you have the closest relationship with the commissioner in what's called your league of record. Now, a league of record, otherwise known as your home league, is probably the league that you care most about. And I think what makes it a home league or a league of record is that everyone sees it that way. It's the most important thing. It's got history behind it. Now, my league of record was something I started this whole pod about. And just to my left, we have the trophy for it's actually the Mandatum Chopper Cup. If anyone gets that reference, you've obviously played a lot of Age of Empires back in the day. But this is a league that was set up about 8 years ago with a fair few of my friends, a fair few of people we didn't know originally but have become friends during fantasy football, and a bit of a rotating cast. And it's been the most important league to us, and it's been the most important league for me because it's the one I couldn't win. I could never get there. And first final, and I won it last year, and I'm hoping to be the first player to go back to back. The league of record should stand as your most important league, and the one you try the hardest for. Everything else is a light dusting, and you might care about it a lot, but your league of record is amongst the fantasy community. If there is an accord that this is your league of record, it's probably the one that most people say, okay, well, you might have won all these starter leagues, and best balls, and all these things, but how many times have you won your league of record? And it doesn't have to be against the best players, even. Quite often, it's not. Some of the hardest leagues are people who. Right, so I consider myself to be a little bit of a fantasy, draft Nick. I listen to a lot. I talk about it a lot. That's why I'm doing it here to you today. And I've played against some so-called experts in the past. Those leagues are easy because you can predict what they're going to be doing because there is a consensus view. The League of Record, there is always 2, 3, or 4 people who come into the league and you know what, listen to again, I will put it in the comments somewhere, but listen to my interview with James last year, Boz. He's in my league of record. We've interviewed him in the past, and his view of fantasy is come to it last minute, see what happens, and he's a berserker. He, on this trophy, I'm just going to have a quick look, just make sure I'm correct. He's won it twice, just by being random. But so your league of record is the most difficult normally because of the random nature of what happens, and it can be, it can curse you, and because you're trying so hard, sometimes you trip yourself up, and it makes it so fun. So we're going to talk a lot about league of record, and league of record will be a big focus because I'm thinking of making it this year as one of my regular topics. We'll have the Road to Redemption, which is part of Dynasty. We'll get onto that in a second. But as League of Record, to see whether we can do it back to back. Names for segments, Return to Glory, maybe. It's tough at the top. Oh, man, these are just coming off. But any of those, if you'd like to hear a segment about that on a weekly basis, we'll go and do that. Now, we did talk about Dynasty as well. Brothers, some of them League of Record is really important, and some people, their League of Record is actually a Dynasty League. The Dynasty is different to a normal league because you keep the same players year on year. You don't do a full draft each time. And I talked briefly about a rookie draft. Each year in Dynasty, you draft rookies. That's all you do. So you keep the players you had last year, and you draft new rookies coming into the league. Obviously, you've got people retiring, you've got people moving to different teams, and you follow those players throughout. And because of that, there is a lot more trading going on because you're not necessarily just going to try and reset to the best team, and you're trying to build a dynasty. You're trying to build something that will stand the test of time. You are becoming effectively a fantasy general manager rather than just a fantasy manager for that year. You're steering it. You're an owner. You're a angel investor, whatever you want to call it. But you're really looking after that team for the longest of time. And Dynasty leagues, ours has been going on for 3 years now. We are looking to try and extend this as long as possible. We're hoping it's going to be a multi-decade league eventually. Maybe this is something we talk about in our 60s. I don't know, but we'll have to see. But Dynasty, there's a lot of leagues out there that have been going on 20 plus leagues, and that's something that we're wanting to do as well. Now, from my experience, I won the Dynasty first year, and Dynasty startups, I'm going to put a bit of an asterisk on that win, because I invested heavily in the draft in this startup in a team that I knew would win that year, and I thought would win. So I had a lot of players on my team that were going to go, to the pasture. I had Brady when he had his amazing year in Tampa. I had Herbert on an absolute steamer. Obviously, he's still in my team, but a fair few players who were coming to a peak and weren't going to serve me well in future years. There's definitely different ways to play it, and you'll experience some of that during the Road to Redemption series. If you're interested, we've already got the first Dynasty Summit, which gives a bit more detail about all the teams in play that we'll talk about. We've got Dynasty Summit 2 coming out, which is going to be the draft report, which is, as I've just finished writing the draft report. I'm going to be recording it shortly after this. So really interesting. And if you're interested in Dynasty, get involved. It's a really fun format, and it's all year round as well. So it's a good way to enjoy fantasy sports. There's another way to enjoy fantasy sports though, which is a bit more hands off, and that is best ball. Best ball, you draft. That's all you do. The computer decides then throughout the year. It plays out like a normal league. So it sets you head-to-head matchups, all of that. The computer decides what your best lineup is each week based on what was your best lineup. So all the games get played. It then calculates, right, well, your maximum score would have been 105. You get 105. If your maximum score was 95, you get 95. And it works out like that. So it's a great place for you to go and draft. And What I might do in some of my mock draft episodes is not do a mock draft, but do a real dynasty draft for money as well. So I might just put $5 down to play against and do a quick draft against people who are actually playing it as well. That way we get maybe a bit more realization. We're not getting lots of people testing the waters, but we can test the waters with our own league. And if we win something at the end, great. If not, it's just giving us a bit better competition in that as well. So those are league types that we're going to be talking a little bit about. There's a couple of extra league types that I probably want to talk about as well. That we've done a whole episode on zombie leagues before, and zombie leagues are really interesting, and they're a kind of offshoot of guillotine and elimination. So, okay, elimination leagues are interesting because they're similar to best ball, but each week the team with the lowest points or the team with just goes basically. They are eliminated completely. I am in a couple of fancy cares ones. So Fancy Care is a great organisation. Go and have a look at it. Charitable organisation. Also, the Scott Fish Bowl do a best ball, which I think is an eliminated. They have an eliminator portion to it this year. I'm going to have a look at that. I'm still trying to get into Scott Fish Bowl. Maybe there'll be an update on that later on in the next coming weeks. Eliminations are great. Again, if you just want a bit more to it, and it's just a different day of dealing with it. You're looking to build a team rather than be best week by week. You're looking just not to be the worst week by week. And guillotines are very similar, but so the final team gets chopped off, but it's an active league. So the final team gets chopped off, and everyone else in that league becomes available. Anyone else who's been on that team, becomes available. So if Christian McCaffrey is on a team that gets chopped off, they become available, and they're available on waivers. And this is where we want to talk about how you can tackle waivers differently as well. Now, waivers in a traditional sense is very similar to how we do it in real NFL. So the worst record gets the best priority. So if you're 10th in your league and you want the same player that someone in 9th in your league wants, well, you get them because you are worse, you need more improvement, and you get better priority. There is a different and, in my opinion, better way of doing it. That's more like an auction, and what you get is FAB, FAAB. I think it's called Free Agent Ad Bucks or Free Agent Addition Bucks or something like that. I don't know what the actual acronym means. Go and have a look at it, FAAB. But FAB, as everyone knows it, is a budget that is associated to your league. You can have it in season, out of season, whatever it is, and you bid on players. So let's say you're in 10th and I bid $5 for that player, but the person in 9th, same situation, bids $6. The person who bids $6 is going to get it. It's a blind bidding system that is used to decide waivers and is really interesting. And I would encourage you, even if you're in a standard redraft league or dynasty, whatever you're in, to try it 1 year because it can really change the dynamics because it just adds a little bit more interest in there as well. So that's fab. And that is used quite heavily in guillotine and zombie leagues. Now, zombie league is something that I'm going to be trying out this year. It's something I'm going to be commissioning a new league for. So I already commissioned 2 leagues. At the moment, I'm going to be commissioning a 3rd, which is a bit more fun. A bit like elimination, a bit like guillotine, but with a story. So a zombie, and there is a full episode on this from last year, but I'll give you the cliff notes. Zombie league, effectively, you have an infected party and you have the healthy party. Now the healthy party starts off, everyone is healthy, and one person is picked before the draft to be the zombie. If anyone in the zombie side, or in the zombie contingent, beats or like catches up to, so imagine it being like a zombie chasing a group of people. If the horde catches up and scores more than anyone in the living contingent, they become a zombie. So that human becomes a zombie. When you become a zombie, you lose half of your FAB, your free agent ad budget, and you lose all your players. So all those players become available. So you've got to scrounge around and work out how you're going to do it. The idea behind this is that throughout the year, the group of humans becomes less because they keep getting eaten by zombies. The zombies start working together, just like Dawn of the Dead or the progression in those Romero films. They become more sentient and start working together more often until they're able to take over all of the humans available. And the idea is that by the end of the season, you have a survivor, the person who escapes on the helicopter, and that's decided in the playoff format, and you have the horde. The idea is that, yeah, again, every time you become a zombie, you have to reset and work with him, and maybe pick a lead zombie to go after the remaining guys, because your resources are dwindling in comparison to your human compatriots. So we're going to be running a league which is a very short roster, so there's always going to be potential players available. So it's going to be a 6-person roster, so QB, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, tight end, and 1 bench player. So that's all you're going to be carrying through. Fan waivers, it's going to be as many people as we can get to the league. I think we've potentially got 14, but if we can extend that, that's great. But the idea is that there is a plentiful pool of people in waivers. There is strategy behind it. There is trades allowed, all of this stuff. Only trades between inside each contingent, and we're going to set up Discord groups. It's going to be really, really fun. So if you're interested in doing something like that, just hit me up on Twitter, or if you know me, text me. I'm more than happy to invite you to that as well. But we'll be doing an announcement episode for that later on in the off season. Right, let's do a little rapid fire here. So we've talked about how commissioners can make or break a league. I think forfeits can make or break a league. So a forfeit for coming last, you don't want to reward it. So forfeits are great. I haven't implemented any of my leagues this year, but I'm really looking forward to trying to. Stuff like calendar shoots, just like the rookie quarterback from the Saints did. That would be really interesting to set up a photo shoot for someone who did that. Getting something tattooed if you're really extreme for the person who loses, or maybe doing the chores for the winner. Doing chores for the winner is always a good one if you're in the state. We carry a wooden spoon in one of our leagues. It's a bit lame, but no one really wants it, so forfeits are always good as well. And we'll quickly cover DFS. DFS, because it's a 3-letter acronym that you need to talk about. You can tell I'm bouncing around a little bit, and we're just trying to get everything through here. DFS is daily fantasy sports. If you like drafting, and if you like refreshing your team each week, daily fantasy sports is for you. So you can play Thursday, Sunday, or Monday effectively, and you pick players out of a pool. You have a budget. It's like an auction effectively. So it's a bit more like if you play fantasy Premier League. It's a bit like that. So you have a budget or a salary cap that you have to use to get players to get the most points. It's generally played in gambling sites. I might be doing a bit of that this year. I'm not sure if I'm going to focus on it, because it's really not core to the values that I really enjoy about fantasy football. But I think it can be quite instructive and a good way if you're looking to make money out of this sport. Not that I think anyone looking to make money out of the sport is listening to this podcast, but it's a really interesting format to play as well, and just keeps things fresh. If you want to root for someone, so sometimes I've played it because I want to root for a particular player, so I'll pick him up and see if I can win something with him. And something we missed out when we were talking about Dynasty, I mentioned we just finished our rookie drafts, and funnily enough, we've just had a waiver period, and I'm just checking, and there is a couple of guys who are asking questions about the taxi squad, and it's probably something to be mindful of. When you see the draft episode of for our Dynasty format, you'll see that a lot of players go on what's called what's called the taxi squad. Now, a taxi squad is a place where it's effectively like red shirting if you followed or what I understand to be red shirting if you follow college sports. You get to have players on your roster, but they don't count to your actual roster number. So we have 3, but they have to hit certain thresholds. So some people do just rookies. We do just rookies. Some people do. You have to have less than 2 years experience to be eligible for a taxi squad place. But the idea is that these players can come into your league and come into your team and not be played. So they can't be played, but no one else can play them, so you can stash them effectively. So it's a bit like a stash ready for you. So fun enough, I'm just having a look on the iPad here. I'm looking at my team, and I've just done a waiver run. So originally I drafted. Yeah, this is a bit of a preview. I drafted Quentin Johnson. I drafted Jahmyr Gibbs and Devin A.K.A. with 3 picks. I moved around a lot. You can see all of that. But I actually picked up during waivers Darnell Washington, Zach Kuntz, Puka Nakua, if I say that right, and Tucker Kraft. So 3 of those guys have gone on my taxi squad. leaving them available to me. I can call them up from my taxi squad at some point later in the year, but they don't count to my roster initially. And finally, we're going to talk about championships. Now, I added this in, bit of tongue in cheek. That looks really weird on camera. So if you want to see a weird picture, click to this time on YouTube. It'd be silly. But anyway, championships are what we want to get you, and that's the only reason I say it. So if you are interested in championships this year, that is what we're looking to do. So our ambition this year is to get as many of you listening. Obviously, I know that some of you listening might be competing against one each other, but as many of you listening championships using the advice we give. So week in, week out, we're going to be giving advice across the board on waivers. So bit of a preview. We'll do a bit of a state of the pod, but the idea is that during the season on Monday, we will be doing a waivers show, which will be audio only. It will eventually come to video as well, but I'm just thinking about the workflow of putting that together. On Thursdays, we'll give you a preview show, which will have themed players in there. So we'll do starts and sits, or effectively players I'm high on, players I'm low on. I'm not sure what we're going to call that segment yet. And we'll have a bit of a regular segment across some of our leagues, a League of Record segment, a Dynasty League segment, and maybe one other. Let's see where it goes. But it's effectively a bit more of a condensed show. Waiver Wire's show is going to be about 15 minutes long. So if you are just looking to pick up some advice on who to pick up that week to help you get that championship, 15 minutes is all I ask from you. If you're looking to get a preview of who you think's good, who should I start, who should I sit, that's when you should come into the Thursday show. That's going to be about 35 minutes. So, if you just want that, less than an hour of your time, and I guarantee, asterisk, whatever, you a title, a championship this year. And then we're going to be peppering that in probably every couple of weeks, maybe a bit more frequently, depending on how our recording schedule goes, with topics that I added previously at my interest, but some people said they just wanted the core stuff. But we are going to be releasing Saturday episodes as well for things that if you're kind of biding your time, waiting between Thursday and Sunday for the games, and you want to hear a bit of an interesting piece about a topic that interests me, maybe an interview with someone, that's what we're going to be doing. And those will be about 45 minutes long. So loads of content for you to consume next year, all of which will be helpful for you getting championships, is what we're going to do. So I'd love to hear your success stories on the back of this as well. And that, guys, is the show. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully we rattled through 101. And apologies if that did seem a bit rushed, but we just wanted to make sure we did that because for those of you new listening who haven't listened to it last year, we just wanted to do a bit of an update. The 102 was important for what's important to us this year as we turn from beginners, hopefully some of you have been on a long journey, into intermediates and beyond. Next year, maybe we'll do a 201. It'll be the advanced class. I don't know. We'll see how that plays out. See if we've got enough content to be refreshing on this. We will be doing next week. You'll probably see either I haven't decided which way we're going to do it, but we might do the Dynasty Draft special, or we'll do the Fancy Glossary. Again, I want to get the beginner content out there, and we'll be doing shortly after that tier lists for drafting. We'll be doing Draft 102 as well because it's coming quickly into that season, so we're getting into July time. We'll be doing releases around my key leagues draft. So we're doing the League of Record, League of Collusionary Gentlemen, the Zombie League, Dynasty League stuff, loads of stuff. So there'll be loads of content for you to listen to until eventually we get into the season and we get into that cadence of that Monday, Thursday, Saturday shows that hopefully you'll be enjoying throughout the year. Thank you so much for listening. As always, there is ways to support the show. You can go to rugbywithpads.com. Whenever I post on Instagram, it doesn't work, but it does. It takes you through to buymeacoffee.com /rugbywithpads, which is where you can subscribe to the memberships. Go and have a look at the short around that. But we actually have our very first member. So I just want to give a big shout out to Ben, who subscribed as a play caller. Your t-shirt will be coming over to you very shortly. And thank you very much. And you've been entered into the competition. The competition is still open, both on YouTube and rugbywithpads.com. So please come and show your support. I want to leave you one final thought. And if you've got this far, please let me know. Please tweet me and see if you know. I want to call you guys who listen to something. And I've just said thank you everyone before, but I feel like every good show has a name for their audience, whether it be, I don't know why this comes to mind, but Drew Gooden's Little Stinkers comes to mind, but the family or whatever it's going to be. I want to think of it, and we've always landed with the ending screen of I'll see you on the virtual gridiron, which I'm guessing you're all waiting for me to say. So I was thinking, would you guys like to be called something around that? And I thought about Gridiron Guardians. I don't know why I like that. It just kind of twist in there. So maybe that's what we'll call you guys. But let me know if you like that. If so, I'll start introducing it in the next few episodes. Maybe I'll say hello to you at the start of the next episode with that. But thank you all for listening, my Gridiron Guardians, and I will see you next week on the Virtual Gridiron.